10 years ago, Saudi Arabia was a country where women could not drive. Cinemas did not exist, and public entertainment was essentially illegal. Today, Saudi Arabia has women racing cars, hosting international music festivals, building a linear city 170 kilometers long in the middle of a desert, and transforming at a speed so extraordinary that the world has not yet processed what Saudi Arabia is becoming. Saudi Arabia is simultaneously the guardian of Islam's two holiest sites, one of the world's largest oil producers, and the country undergoing the most dramatic and most controversial national transformation of the 21st century. What is happening inside Saudi Arabia right now is either the most extraordinary national reinvention in modern history or the most complicated and the truth. As always with Saudi Arabia, is both at exactly the same time. Everything you think you know about Saudi Arabia was formed by a version of the country that is changing faster than most people realize. Saudi Arabia in 2026 looks so different from Saudi Arabia in 2015 that visitors who knew the country before describe feeling like they have arrived somewhere entirely new. And this video is about the gap between the Saudi Arabia the world imagines and the Saudi Arabia that actually exists right now. Saudi Arabia controls approximately 17% of the world's proven oil reserves, the second largest in the world, and has used that oil wealth to build infrastructure, cities, and institutions at a scale that staggers the imagination. Saudi Arabia's Aramco, the state oil company, is the most profitable company in the history of human commerce, generating revenues that exceed the GDP of most countries on Earth in a single year. But Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, known internationally as MBS, has looked at this oil wealth and made a decision that defines everything happening in Saudi Arabia right now. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 program is a comprehensive national transformation plan built on one central premise. The oil will eventually run out, and Saudi Arabia must become something else before that happens. Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 has set targets that would have seemed completely impossible in 2015, increasing non-oil government revenue by 1,000%, raising women's workforce participation from 17 to 30%, and transforming Saudi Arabia into a global tourism destination attracting 100 million visits per year by 2030. Saudi Arabia is not adjusting its economy, it is attempting to rebuild it from the foundations up while it is still running. Saudi Arabia is building NEOM, a project so ambitious, so unprecedented, and so genuinely difficult to comprehend that most people assume it cannot possibly be real until they look at the satellite images. NEOM is a planned city region in northwest Saudi Arabia covering an area larger than Belgium, and its centerpiece is a structure called The Line, a linear city 170 kilometers long, 900 meters tall, and 200 meters wide that will house 9 million people in a single continuous building with no cars, no roads, and no carbon emissions. The Line in Saudi Arabia will be powered entirely by renewable energy, will move its residents by high-speed rail running through the interior of the structure, and will have a mirrored exterior that reflects the surrounding desert landscape. Whether Saudi Arabia's The Line is completed as planned, scaled back, or ultimately reimagined, the ambition it represents tells you more about what Saudi Arabia intends to become than any official statement or policy document. Saudi Arabia is also building Diriyah, a massive cultural and heritage destination on the outskirts of Riyadh being developed around the original home of the Saudi state, a UNESCO World Heritage site of mud brick architecture that Saudi Arabia is restoring and expanding into a destination for international visitors. Saudi Arabia is simultaneously building a futuristic linear city in the desert and restoring its ancient mud brick capital, and both projects are happening at the same time with the same urgency. Now, the history that most people do not know. Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam, the religion followed by approximately 1.8 billion people on earth, and the two holiest sites in Islam, the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca and the Masjid an-Nabawi in Medina, are both located within Saudi Arabia's borders. Every year, Saudi Arabia receives the largest annual gathering of human beings on earth, The Hajj pilgrimage, with between 2 and 3 million Muslims arriving within Saudi Arabia over a period of just 5 days. The logistics of managing 2 to 3 million people simultaneously in Saudi Arabia, feeding them, housing them, moving them safely between sites, providing medical care, and ensuring the spiritual integrity of one of the world's most significant religious events, represent one of the most complex operational challenges undertaken by any government on earth on an annual basis. Saudi Arabia has spent billions developing the infrastructure around Mecca and Medina specifically for Hajj, including the world's largest hotel by room count, the world's largest clock tower, and a train system connecting Hajj sites that operates for only 5 days per year. Saudi Arabia contains the ancient Nabatean city of Hegra, also called Madan Sela, a site of rock-cut tombs, temples, and inscriptions carved directly into sandstone mountains that predates Islam by centuries and rivals Petra in Jordan in its scale and beauty. Saudi Arabia's Hegra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site that received almost no international visitors for decades because Saudi Arabia did not have a tourist visa system and is now one of the centerpieces of Saudi Arabia's new tourism strategy. The empty quarter, Rub el Khali in Arabic, is a sand desert covering approximately 650,000 square kilometers across Saudi Arabia and neighboring countries, making it the largest continuous sand desert on Earth. Saudi Arabia's empty quarter contains sand dunes over 250 meters high, has almost no permanent human habitation, and is so remote and so extreme that it remains one of the least explored terrestrial environments on Earth. Saudi Arabia's transformation under Vision 2030 has produced social changes that would have been completely unimaginable a decade ago. Women in Saudi Arabia gained the legal right to drive in 2018, a change so significant that it made front pages around the world, and since then, Saudi Arabia has progressively expanded women's rights to travel independently, obtain passports without male, guardian permission, register births and marriages, and access a growing range of professional and public spaces. Saudi Arabia's female workforce participation is rising measurably year on year as these changes take effect. Saudi Arabia opened its first licensed cinema in 2018 after a 35-year ban on public film screenings. Since then, Saudi Arabia has developed one of the fastest-growing cinema markets in the world, with hundreds of screens opened across the country and Saudi Arabia's box office revenues growing at rates that have attracted every major international film distributor to the market. Saudi Arabia went from 0 legal cinemas to a booming film industry in under a decade. Saudi Arabia now hosts international music concerts, mixed-gender entertainment events, comedy festivals, and sporting spectacles, including Formula One racing, boxing, world championship bouts, and international football tournaments. Saudi Arabia's entertainment sector, essentially non-existent before 2016, is now one of the fastest growing in the world, funded by government investment and driven by a young population, of which approximately 70% is under 35 years old. Saudi Arabia's food culture is one of the most underreported aspects of the country and one of the most extraordinary. Kabza, slow-cooked rice with meat, dried fruits, and a spice combination that varies by region and by family, is Saudi Arabia's national dish, and a meal so central to Saudi hospitality that preparing it properly for guests is considered a matter of genuine personal honor. Saudi Arabia's kabza is served on enormous communal platters designed for sharing, eaten with hands in the traditional manner, and represents a hospitality tradition that predates the modern Saudi state by centuries. Mandi, meat and rice slow-cooked in an underground clay oven called a tandoor, is a dish from Saudi Arabia's Hadramaut tradition that produces meat of such extraordinary tenderness that it falls from the bone at a touch. Saudi Arabia's mandi has spread across the entire Arab world and is now considered one of the defining dishes of Arabian cuisine, though its origins lie in the specific cooking traditions of southern Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's coffee culture centers on kahwa, a lightly roasted coffee brewed with cardamom and saffron, and served in small handleless cups that are refilled continuously as long as a guest wishes to receive them. In Saudi Arabia, serving kahwa to a guest is an act of hospitality so fundamental that refusing to serve it would be considered a serious social failure, and shaking the cup gently from side to side is the specific gesture used in Saudi Arabia to indicate you have had enough without having to say so. Dates in Saudi Arabia are not a snack, they are a cultural institution. Saudi Arabia produces over 1 million tons of dates annually across hundreds of varieties, and offering dates to guests is an Islamic tradition, specifically connected to the Prophet Muhammad that Saudi Arabia takes seriously as both a religious and social practice. The date farms of Saudi Arabia's Al-Asa region, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, represent an agricultural tradition that has sustained human communities in the Arabian Peninsula for thousands of years. Saudi Arabia has laws that every visitor must understand completely before arrival. Alcohol is completely prohibited in Saudi Arabia, not restricted, not limited to licensed venues, but completely and absolutely prohibited for everyone. There are no exceptions in Saudi Arabia for tourists, no licensed hotel bars, and no diplomatic exemptions. Saudi Arabia is one of the strictest countries on earth regarding alcohol, and the consequences of being found in possession of it are serious. Drug trafficking in Saudi Arabia carries the death penalty, and Saudi Arabia enforces this with a consistency that leaves no room for misunderstanding. Saudi Arabia executes drug traffickers regardless of nationality, and the number of executions carried out in Saudi Arabia each year makes it one of the world's most active users of capital punishment. Dress codes in Saudi Arabia apply to everyone in public spaces. Women are expected to dress modestly with arms and legs covered, and while the requirement for women to wear the full abaya in public was relaxed in 2019, modest dress remains a legal and social expectation that Saudi Arabia enforces. Men in Saudi Arabia should also dress conservatively in public. Shorts and sleeveless shirts are considered inappropriate outside of private spaces. Public behavior between unmarried couples in Saudi Arabia remains legally restricted. Public displays of affection, sharing private spaces between unmarried men and women, and behavior considered contrary to Islamic morality can result in police attention and serious consequences. Saudi Arabia's religious police, the Mutawa, have significantly reduced their public enforcement role under Vision 2030, but the laws they once enforced remain on the books and can still be applied. Photography in Saudi Arabia requires serious caution. Photographing government buildings, military installations, palaces, and certain public infrastructure is illegal. Photographing local people, particularly women without explicit permission in Saudi Arabia, can result in serious complaints and legal consequences that no tourist wants to navigate. Saudi Arabia has a cultural concept called wasta, a system of social connections, family networks, and personal relationships that operates alongside and sometimes above the formal legal and business systems. Understanding wasta in Saudi Arabia is essential to understanding how things actually get done, who knows whom, which family someone belongs to, and what obligations those relationships create matters enormously in Saudi Arabia's daily social and professional reality. Saudi Arabia's relationship with time operates differently from Western expectations. Appointments in Saudi Arabia are understood as approximate rather than precise. Meetings begin when everyone has arrived rather than when the clock indicates, and the pace of relationship building before business is conducted is significantly slower than Western professionals typically expect. Saudi Arabia rewards patience in ways that impatience cannot access. Here is the honest complexity that Saudi Arabia demands. The reforms of Vision 2030 are real, measurable, and genuinely significant. Women driving, cinemas opening, entertainment expanding, tourism launching, and Saudi Arabia deserves acknowledgement for changes that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. But Saudi Arabia's human rights record remains a serious international concern. With restrictions on political dissent, limitations on freedom of expression, and specific cases that have drawn global attention and condemnation. The transformation of Saudi Arabia is happening on terms set entirely by Saudi Arabia's leadership, at a pace determined by Saudi Arabia's leadership, and within boundaries defined by Saudi Arabia's leadership. It is modernization from above, rather than reform from below, and the distinction matters. Saudi Arabia is changing, genuinely and significantly. But the question of who controls that change and who benefits from it is one that Saudi Arabia's own citizens and international observers are asking with increasing urgency. Saudi Arabia sits at one of the most extraordinary crossroads in its history, between its identity as the guardian of Islam's holiest sites and its ambition to become a global entertainment and tourism destination, between its oil-dependent past and its diversified future, between the social conservatism of its religious tradition and the aspirations of a young population that has watched the rest of the world on their smartphones. Saudi Arabia has not resolved these tensions. It is living inside them in real time, and the resolution will define what Saudi Arabia becomes for the next century. Subscribe to Untold Facts, because Saudi Arabia is not the country the headlines describe, and it never was. Saudi Arabia is a civilization at a turning point, a culture in transformation, and one of the most important stories happening anywhere on Earth right now. And now, finally, you know what is actually happening inside it?